Welcome back, my friends, to our second installment. We're still in Unit 1, Part 1. Let's wrap this up. So let's begin. Let's start. What kind of government does the United States have? We are going to begin. You are going to begin next week. Um, who knows when you'll be watching this, if you'll be watching this, but you're going to craft your ideal democracy and what your ideal democracy looks like, and it's a fun activity we're going to do together. And so many of you, if I asked this question in class, right, if you were in front of me, you would shout out democracy. So is that the government that we have?
Political season is at its height right now, and we're all glad to be Americans because we live in a democracy. Well, wait, is this really a democracy?
America is not a democracy.
See, I was talking with this guy.
My name is Ben Swan,
He does a lot of journalism about our political system.
and I am a reporter and anchor with WXIX TV in Cincinnati. I'm also the host and producer of Reality Check.
And I was trying to figure out what he meant.
Let me give you an example
So we
of that.
started talking about ancient Greece.
Ancient Greece was a democracy. The people had the ultimate say. So, for instance, in the case of the healthcare law, instead of having lawmakers who would draft a bill and vote on a bill and then let the people know what the decision was, they would write a bill, a healthcare bill, and then all the people would go to the polls and the people would vote. And if the majority of the people said we like the healthcare law, it would become law. And if the majority of people said we don't like it, then it wouldn't become law. Everything would be based upon majority rules. But when the founders created our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, they established a form of government, and they actually determined that a democracy was the worst form of.
We are going to talk about why. And it's not Miss Cook's hypothesis as to why. Our founders explain their reasonings, their rationale for everything in the Federalist Papers. I think like the least read, text, and it should be read, the most read. We like to hypothesize, what did our framers, what did our founding fathers think? We know what they think. It's in the Federalist Papers. Federalist 10 is all about factions, and it's evident Madison and really many of our framers were frightened of the idea of a democracy, right, of majority rule. They associate it with mob rule, because let's think about it. Back then, these rich, right, white, land-owning, slave-owning American, colonial heroes, they were the elite minority. Think about this. If it was majority rule direct democracy, these white guys in power would be the minority. It would be mob rule, which is scary to them because it wouldn't be in their best interests, right? Their elite, wealth and power won't have that same merit, right? That same leadership as it would in some sort of representative democracy. And so we'll talk more in class and really examine the train of thought and the thinking of our framers, but it's all in the Federalist Papers.
Political season.
Majority rules. But when the founders created our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, they established a form of government, and they actually determined that a democracy was the worst form of government.
The worst form of government?
Many of the founders said that democracy was nothing more than mob rule. And so they were against democracy and instead felt the correct form of government for this free nation was a republic.
Ah, yes, a republic. Yeah, to the republic for which it stands. And stuff like that. So, what's a republic?
Well, a republic is a form of government. Let me start that again. A republic is a form of government where the people will go to the polls to elect men and women who represent them. And then those elected leaders create and vote on laws. The people don't vote directly on laws that affect their life. Rather, it's lawmakers who are chosen among the people. And these are supposed to be the best, the smartest, the most ethical, the most moral, the most upright men and women in a society who represent the majority of society. And that's the form of government we have in the United States. The other thing that's important to understand is the distinction between democracy and a republic is that a democracy is the rule of man ruling over each other, which our founders believe turns into mob rule. A republic is the rule of law. Laws are formed and created as a Bill of Rights or a constitution, and then those laws are never superseded by mob rule or superseded by elected officials. They are all under law. So republic is actually the rule of law.
You heard it here. We are ruled by law in a republic.
Now, I just want to point out the video described elected officials, right, following the rule of law. The Constitution is the law. And the most recent example of someone of power, high power, the highest power in the U.S. Senate, which is just one chamber of Congress, his name is Mitch McConnell, and he is a senator from Kentucky. His wife is Elaine Chao, and she is the Secretary of Transportation in Trump's cabinet. Now, I digress on that. Going back to what he did, what the Senate did. During Obama's administration, he appointed a Supreme Court justice because Scalia passed away in 2015. And instead, the Senate decided to blockade that pick. The pick was Merrick Garland. And they said, nope, we're going to wait until, that next. Again, the election is 2016. They've got a year to go, a little under a year. They said, no, we're good. We're going to wait. We're going to wait and see if the Republicans win the election, and then we're going to appoint our guy. Even though Merrick Garland was pretty much a centrist, and that's why Obama picked him. He thought it would be, a clear way to the Supreme Court. It would be a bipartisan effort and agreement. So that's just, to me, a huge example of, this video. A republic should not be, the rule of law should not be superseded by elected officials. And sometimes that's what happens. And I think that's what gives, individuals such a negative view on government. And hopefully this class will help enlighten some and hopefully brighten some of our views. Okay. So, this balance between governmental power and our individual rights has really been a hallmark of our political inception and development. Think about it. If just good old King Georgie III would have given us that parliamentary representation, who knows where we would be. I mean, I still think we would have obtained our independence. Eventually, we wanted to break away from that mother country, and we had the reasoning and rationale to do so because we said King George III was trampling on our individual rights. We were not represented. So it's always been a hallmark of our historical development as well as political. Okay, so what are we? We are a democratic republic, but the term I will use is a federal republic. So we have a constitution, right, and that creates this federal republic. I say federal because we have federalism where power is divided and shared between a federal government and then state governments. We'll get to that later. But this democratic federal republic, we have a constitution, and it creates this type of representation where we have a collective sovereignty of states, right? 50 of them. They gather for, national interests, national defense, national needs, and that is what we have. And as you can see in this visual, you can see, the primary differences of a direct democracy versus a republic. And the video kind of encompassed that. So, versus, everyone participating in, every vote or decision versus just the elected representatives and those more educated officials that are supposed to do the work of their citizens, their constituents, but sometimes they get into office and then things take a turn. So what is democracy? Why are we always talking about democracy? Because we have democracy. In fact, there's different types of democracy, and it's going to get confusing because there's two different types, direct and representative. But there's also democratic theories. I'm going to talk about participatory, pluralist, and elite democracy. And America has all three types. This is advanced. It's for my honors classes. standard, kids. You do not need to know those, democratic theories. And if you plan on taking the AP exam, it'll be on there and you'll ace it. So, what is democracy? It's a system of organizing government, right? Selecting our politicians, right? Our policy makers, and that policy, those laws, those statutes need to represent, and they're supposed to respond to the public's preferences. Anytime it doesn't, well, we then elect someone new, right? We don't keep an incumbent or an office holder in power if they're not doing their job and they're not, crafting policy that represents and responds to their constituents who elect them in the first place. We'll talk about our representation, state, Massachusetts, and federal at a later date. This is real facts here. And again, read the Federalist Papers. We will, honors students, I am going to assign them. You can dislike me all you want, but I will also play an informational video. It's Hip Hughes, but he will kind of help explain further these Federalist Papers because they can be difficult, but that's what we're here for. So like I mentioned earlier, our founding fathers and our constitutional framers, because again, we had an Articles of Confederation first. The first form of government we had was a confederation. Failure, okay? Didn't work. Back to the drawing board, our framers at the Constitutional Convention. So there is a difference between our founding fathers and our framers. Anyway, both groups really heavily doubted the American public's ability to be informed and participate actively in government. So they specifically established this type of representative democracy. You're going to see when I talk about elite democracy, the reasoning and rationale why they created the Electoral College. They did not believe in America, in the majority. They thought the majority was uninformed, uneducated, and back then it was. They didn't, again, there's no national newspaper, there was no social media, there was no TV or internet. They doubted, how is a typical, Georgian gonna know who to vote for if someone is running, from Massachusetts for presidency? Or, how is someone from Rhode Island going to know anything about South Carolina politics? So they will create this electoral college, which I'll chat about when I talk about elite democracy. So yeah, long story short, our framers, our founding fathers doubted us. So they will set up this federal republic, again, a representative democracy. So that way the intelligent folks, they're in there making the decisions because they're more qualified. Or so we would think. This is a political cartoon we will analyze at a later date. Okay, so what is representative democracy? The key words here is elected reps. They are elected by the people. This is popular sovereignty at its finest. And if you come in from Fanning, pop sov. Let the people decide. How do they decide? By this, representative democracy, by showing up to the polling stations and voting. That is popular sovereignty. And if you're not participating, then you better not be complaining. Sorry. That's my tangent. So, citizens, us, right, we elect the representatives if you are 18 plus, and those politicians, right, those informed citizens, more informed than us common folk, they do the work of government for us. Ms. Cook is not in Congress voting on any health care bills. No, and I wish. Instead, Ms. Cook is going to the voting booth and she is voting for, Richard E. Neal or for our state Senate, right? Our state senators are Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren. Although I did vote for Joe Kennedy. Sorry, guys. But that's for the primary or preliminaries, and we'll talk about what both of those are. There are differences. So, what do democracies need to work? Democracy needs 3 things to work. 3 things. This will be on the quiz, this will be on a test, whatever that format is, you gotta know this. For democracy to work and continue to work. And someone asked this question on the Padlet, and I thought it was fantastic. You asked, do I think that America will continue to be a democracy? And my answer was yes. Why? You guys. I have more faith in you guys than I do my generation, because my generation wasn't forced to learn civics, right? And like I would say, forced to learn. We didn't have the opportunity, the gift to learn it. U.S. government was not a requisite or a graduation requirement. So you guys are just already ahead of the game, and I have so much faith with you guys. So 3 things for democracies to work. Compromise. What is compromise? The processing or the processes, right? The process of adjusting competing interests to basically find that middle ground, that most acceptable position. So for example, I'm just going to use, I don't know, curfew. Let's say you guys want to stay out until, 3 a.m. You want to be out until 3 a.m. on a Friday, Saturday, summer vacation night, non-school night. Your parent, your guardian, whoever takes care of you thinks that's crazy. What are you, like 20? No, 3 a.m. is insanity. You have to be home at 11, 10. Let's say you have really strict parents or guardians. 10. You would come to a compromise maybe midnight, right? Government needs compromise. A democracy needs compromise. Right now, we have congressional stalemates, especially in the Senate, because everything is bipartisan, everything lacks compromise, and it's really frustrating. So, in addition to that, what else do we need? So I guess this is number 2 and 3. We need citizens to be informed and run for public office, and that goes for all levels. State and local impact your lives far greater. Yet no one cares about those elections. No one even knows their, city or town officials. Instead, it's just the federal government. Really, it's just the presidential elections that we care about, and that's so unfortunate. We need participation in order for good people to be in public office. And the last but not least, we need you to vote. Groups have fought and died for suffrage, the right to vote. Exercise that right. Some people have to go 2-3 hours away to cast a ballot. Some teachers can literally, as soon as their shift is over, walk into the library and cast their ballot. Please participate. Okay. Moving on. Participatory democracy. So if you're in standard, flip ahead. Flash forward. Fast forward? I don't even know. I'm so old. Skip this part. You will not be assessed on this. Honors AP kiddos. This will be on the exam. You gotta know this. So here's the first type of democracy or democratic theory. It's called participatory. You see this a lot in local and state government. This is where us as citizens, we have multiple access points to our policymakers, our politicians, and the decisions that they make. So for example, a really, really good example is town hall meetings. Just the other day, I was watching presidential candidate Joe Biden, and he had a town hall, and it was televised. Obviously, state and local might not be, but sometimes they are. More often than not, they are televised, especially in Ludlow. So town hall meetings, referendums, that's a question on the ballot. I will share the 2 ballot questions with you guys. I'm going to photocopy them and put them on PDF. Upload them to Classroom. One is on ranked choice voting, which I'm going to brag all about this year. And then the other, I can't even remember. It's on like motor vehicles or something. I don't know. I got to read it up. So I'm going to inform myself, and then I will photocopy for you guys. The best part, I think, the best example of participatory democracy, student council. Every grade has a treasurer, a secretary, a vice president, and a president. And then there's class reps. Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Together, that makes the student council. And that is how change is done at Ludlow High School. You don't just complain to your parent and your parent maybe emails the principal. That's not how the dress code was changed. That's not how the cell phone policy was changed. It was student council. Participatory democracy in action. Another good example begins with SC as well. So the first SC, student council. Second, school committee, right? The school committee, the ones making these decisions. By the way, you need 0 educational experience to get on the school committee. It's elected position. So, do we know our school committee members? I hope you do. We will this year. We're going to learn them. I'm sure some of you do, right? Chip Harrington and both Jake Oliveira are running for Petrolati's position. He is no longer in the running. He wants to step away after, I don't even know, 20-something years. So he is taking a back seat. He is not running for re-election, and it'll be Chip Harrington, the Republican, versus Jake Oliveira, the Democrat. All right, a pluralist democracy. So this is where individuals work through groups. Key word here is plural, meaning more than one groups. And these groups are formed around common causes.
This special interest group.
All these interest groups.
Interest group money.
It has largely been driven by special interest groups.
What exactly is an interest group? And why do they get people all riled up? To figure this out, let's play which of these is an interest group. Dog owners, kindergartners, car dealers, or NBA players? The answer? They all could be interest groups. People who care about the same things come together to form an interest group. In order to advance their goals, interest groups can seek to influence the government for funding or favorable laws. For example, kindergartners want more recess, car dealers want to close the deal, and NBA players, they just want to jam. There are a lot of ways that interest groups try to influence the government. Some hire lobbyists to make their case for them. Some take to the streets to hold rallies or start petitions. Some groups let money do the talking and donate to politicians. And some take to the airwaves and social media to get noticed. But why are interest groups controversial? Interest groups work to promote the interests of their members, and this can mean working against the interests of others. The difference between interest group and special interest is a matter of perspective. For instance, who could be against a playground? How about
Or a brand new track at Ludlow High School? Who could be against that?
retiree who doesn't have kids or grandkids? He doesn't want to pay more taxes for a playground he'll never use.
Or a track?
We all want the government to be on our
So
side,
sad.
but sometimes it's hard to accommodate the interests of every group.
So, and again, don't take notes on this. This is for those watching this on YouTube. Interest groups. Again, it's an organization of people who share a common interest or interests, and they work together to protect and promote that interest. Yes, it's self-serving. Sometimes it's against the other interests. It could be conflicting against a whole nother group and their interests. And the one aim here is to influence the government based on their interest. Interest groups vary in size, aim, tactic, money. We'll talk all about Federalist 10. They're divided into categories. This is for those taking the AP exam. So the categories for interest groups, right? We have economic and non-economic. So economic are going to be like professional associations, labor groups, agricultural groups, business groups, and non-economic, like the name suggests, it's more broad for like a public good, public purpose, like improving air quality or like PETA, the World Wildlife Foundation. Hopefully those are a couple examples. So these interest groups will hire lobbyists. And those lobbyists speak on their behalf. And lobbying and lobbyists, as negative as they are, we'll talk about them all year long. It's the First Amendment. It's free speech and petitioning the government. You're going to see that's why there's so much money in elections, because they're going to argue. We'll learn the Supreme Court case that money equals free speech. And so it's unfortunate. All right, so we talked about participatory, we talked about pluralist. The third type of democracy or democratic theory is elite. I foreshadowed, referenced this earlier, and this type of democracy or democratic theory is a small group of elite, right, policymakers. They're the ones making the decisions. They're highly informed, highly educated. They're powerful, and the argument is this group is more knowledgeable than the rest. That's why they created the Electoral College. They first thought about maybe Congress should pick. Scrap that idea. They thought of a 10-year term presidency. Scrap that idea. And they thought about this. And so we're going to talk all about the Electoral College and its original creation, and if you guys think that it should stay or go. All right. So democracy, this may or may not appear in some form on some sort of AP test, mock test. So I think it's important. So I think the first challenge to democracy is the increased need for technical expertise. And this is to be expected, right? How much can you or I understand a 5,000-page bill on pharmaceuticals? Honestly, who wants to read 5,000 pages? Like, that's a lot of pages. So even our politicians rely on the experts and the expertise of others. And so some argue like, well, that's not all that democratic because, yeah, I elected, Joe Sega, but Joe Sega has to hire 18 experts just to teach him how to write a bill or a proposed law. So that is a challenge, this increased need for technical expertise. Even our politicians, even our finest politicians, rely on experts and outsource, and that's just a reality. Second challenge, we have limited participation in government. We really do. They always say if government is working, government's boring. And so right now, I don't think government's all that boring. Participate. But yeah, we have a very limited participation in government. The expression goes, there's two things you don't want to know how they're made. Sausage links and laws. Although I might even sub in hot dogs and laws. Sorry if you like hot dogs. I can't stand hot dogs. Gross, gross, gross. The third challenge to democracy, really our American democracy, is really escalating campaign costs. U.S. government, we will not go into detail about PACs and super PACs because I know I'll just bore you to death. What are PACs? Political action committees that have singular interests, meaning they care about like one thing. And these PACs will kind of donate to candidates. This is where interest groups can also come into play, and lobbying and lobbyists, and it can become a dirty game. So a PAC, or a political action committee, is an organization that raises money privately. Again, privately. Why? To influence lawmaking, to influence legislation, to serve their agenda, their singular interest. So it could be, protecting the Second Amendment. It could be, pro-choice women's reproduction rights. It could be air quality, water. Okay, it could be, trying to stop animal testing. So they have singular interests. And these PACs, or political action committees, they want to influence legislation or lawmaking and elections, and they raise money privately. There is a cap on PACs, and that's why there's something called super PACs, and this little cartoon kind of shows you there's unlimited cash flow and an unlimited supply of cash with super PACs. The video I'll show my honors kids is like a boxing video. And so I wanted to show you guys a little visual here that shows you presidential campaign spending. Like I referenced, escalating campaign costs is a huge challenge to American democracy. And here we have from 1960 through 2016. And you can see here, the color coding, the official campaign, And then in the shaded color here is a single candidate super PAC. So you'll see super PACs will not even come into existence until 2012. And there will be a Supreme Court decision which kind of allows this to occur. And we'll talk all about it. Okay, the fourth challenge is definitely how different and diverse our political interests and the politicians' interests are. So their interests, right, what they believe in, their values, their moral compass, it might conflict. And so we're not able to form coalitions to form a majority. So we can't establish policy. So there is kind of a blockade or, I don't want to use the term filibuster because I'll talk about that with the Senate, but basically there's a stalemate. Nothing can get done. So when we have this type of bipartisanship to the point where it's so fragmented or fractured that we can't even form a majority, right? It's 50-50 or 52-48 and establish quality policy because everything is such on party lines. So that is a real challenge to democracy. And that's kind of just the two-party system that we have. This political cartoon really sums it up. What do you know? That stems into challenge number 5, extreme partisanship. So partisan means you focus on party lines. Bipartisan, okay, between party lines. So what we want is bipartisanship. We want both parties to come together and compromise, right? Form some sort of consensus. But instead, we have extreme polarization, extreme partisanship. And I'm going to reference some Supreme Court cases that are really going to amaze you because you're going to see certain issues like women's health care, abortion, never used to be a partisan issue. Roe versus Wade in 1973, 5 Republicans was in that Supreme Court room making that decision, and it was a 7-2 decision. 5 Republicans. The 2 dissented. 1 was a Republican, 1 was a Democrat. So abortion in 1973 was not a partisan issue. It didn't embody a political party. Right now you hear pro-choice and you immediately think Democrat. Or you hear pro-life and you immediately think Republican. Everything is just so, forced into a box, a generalization, right? Everything's so black and white, where the majority of our views, our values, and our political ideologies are on a spectrum. We need compromise, right? Compromise is necessary. If we are going to have bipartisanship, we need compromise. Not 50-50 and then Mike Pence, the vice president, decides to step in and cast the tie-breaking vote. That is his job, his duty based on the Constitution. And they decide to allow Betsy DeVos to become the Secretary of Education. She's the only one in the Trump administration that I'll really talk negatively about, and it's because this is my field, this is my expertise, and I know more about education at the young age of 33, public education, than this woman. We'll talk how she got the job at a later date. All right, so more challenges. There's a couple more challenges here. So far we have 5. The 6th is individualism. This is actually a Renaissance value going all the way back to the Renaissance, and it's this belief that individuals, right, you should be proud of who you are, proud of your work, believe in that individualistic nature rather than communalism. And so from really modern history, I'd say 1600s on, this belief has only grown more and more. Our country was founded on this value of individualism, and really in government and political science, individualism means that basically Americans, us as individuals, should be left alone on our own by the government. Look, we fled the old world, the oppressive British government, from that feudal and religious oppression. We weren't, represented. So we formed this country. We broke away from Britain based on this value of individualism. So this is a highly, highly valued, and it is a Renaissance value, and we believe in a free market. Think about the economics, right? Laissez-faire. The government shouldn't interfere, shouldn't intervene. It's called libertarians, but many libertarians think that really the government, shouldn't be collecting taxes. The government shouldn't be getting involved in our lives. Many people that are anti-mask and say, what do they say? The government is trampling on my rights, trying to make me or force a mandate to wear a mask. Or how about you guys? You might feel like this is taking away from your individualism, being forced to get a flu shot because you're just a high school public student, unless, you're remote. We'll talk about that in class. It'll be really interesting. So individualism is found everywhere because we believe in limited government. We have a strong preference in our economic system for laissez-faire economics, or, let it be. Our government really shouldn't intervene, and if they have to, as little as possible. So people who want to slash regulations left and right highly value individualism, and it is a challenge to our democracy, and we'll talk about why in class. Another challenge is laissez-faire politics. Laissez-faire, you learned that freshman year. It's the French word. Adam Smith, the Scottish economist, wrote a book all about laissez-faire individualism and laissez-faire economics and what we call laissez-faire politics. What is this? It's really the idea, right, that laissez-faire belief infiltrating our political system, our economic system, free market, little to no government intervention. Yes, some will argue that, yeah, so what? It contributes to greed. That's healthy. That's healthy for competition. Others are so against this because they think, well, it just creates the capitalistic society that we have, and many get trampled on. Okay, so competition here. Innovation. Okay, the fill in the blank here is innovation. The argument here, okay, like I was just saying, those that advocate for laissez-faire economics, right? Or capitalism. It's the belief and theory behind capitalism. So what? Some rise to the top and some never do. So what? That will create competition, and competition equals innovation. Do you think that government should have a larger role or a limited role in the regulation of business and how businesses practice? Should they be allowed to do whatever they please, or should we have some sort of regulation? Should we have, a lot more regulation? I'm sure there's some of you in here that do know what the Green New Deal is, and you're thinking, yeah, we need to, climate change is real. While others probably that's not even a concern for them. So I'm curious, and I can't wait to gauge your interest and see where you fall. Okay, one of the last challenges here to democracy is something called populism. Populism, some argue that Bernie Sanders is a populist candidate. Some argue Donald Trump is a populist candidate, and I can kind of see that. Populism is the idea that this person, this candidate, this savior, is going to lead the people in their struggle kind of against the privileged elite. So populism, I kind of describe it or define it as the rights of average citizens in their struggle against the privileged elites, right? The oligarchy, or what you might hear. So for example, from a Republican view, a populist candidate might argue, right, like in Trump has succeeded with this, about getting government off the backs of Americans by, you know, deregulating some things or changing some Obama era rules, making business more business friendly, right? More fiscally friendly for those businessmen. So that's a conservative populism, and yeah, Trump could fit that category. I would argue he's more of a populist candidate than he is a Republican. But again, the Republican Party and their views have shifted, so it's really, really interesting to me. I love studying this stuff. A liberal example. I'm going to use good old Bernie or Elizabeth Warren. And these are, you know, candidates that are just, you know, the common man, the common folks, and they're going to stand up to corporations and big business, right? Or the pharmaceutical industry. Or, like Bernie Sanders would say, Wall Street and the big banks and business, right? He's always talking about Wall Street and the rich and the wealthy. And so many argue he is a populist, right, candidate when he was running for president. He is a registered independent, and he's a senator from Vermont.
Democrats behind the 26.
So this video talks more about populism on a global scale. So for the purposes of this video, making it as short as possible, I'm going to end that here. But as you can see, and he probably did a far better job than I did describing populism, both Donald Trump, a conservative or a Republican at least, and Bernie Sanders, a liberal, often called a socialist, both kind of define themselves, not themselves, but are defined, their very core, as populist candidates. So it's definitely a challenge, especially when, you know, government is kind of always to blame. How can you trust government if the government's always being blamed? All right. Other challenges. We're going to do this together on Google Meets. So that's a wrap for Unit 1, Part 1, Intro to American Democracy. Join me next time for Part 2. I will film the entire video. It is the origins of American government. We're going to chat about good old, right, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, going all the way through the Enlightenment. And then we can watch some John Adams. Till next time, my friends.